The morning sun cast long shadows across the Nevada desert as Colonel Marcus Kane stepped out of his transport vehicle. The alien structure before him defied every law of physics he'd studied at West Point. It hung suspended 3 feet above the sand, a perfect crystalline dodecahedron that pulsed with an inner light the color of deep ocean water. "Sir, the readings are still off the charts," Sergeant Williams reported, her voice tight with barely controlled fear. "Whatever this thing is, it's been broadcasting on every frequency we can detect. The eggheads say it's some kind of invitation." Marcus adjusted his tactical vest and checked his sidearm out of habit. 30 years of military service had taught him that when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. The object had appeared overnight, detected by satellites, and triggering every early warning system from NORAD to the Pentagon. Within hours, similar objects had materialized above major cities across Earth. "Any word from the other sites?" he asked, never taking his eyes off the floating structure. "Same story everywhere, sir. London, Tokyo, Moscow, Sao Paulo. All identical. All broadcasting the same message." Williams paused, consulting her tablet. "Translation teams have been working around the clock. Best they can figure, it's an invitation to join something called the Galactic Defense Coalition." Marcus had read the briefings during his flight from D.C. First contact protocols that had been theoretical exercises just yesterday were now operational reality. According to the alien message, Earth had been observed and deemed worthy of consideration for membership in an interstellar alliance. The catch was simple. They wanted Earth to contribute military forces to help defend against something called the Void Swarm, a species that consumed entire solar systems. "The president made his decision yet?" Marcus asked. "Yes, sir. You're looking at Earth's entire military contribution to the galaxy." Williams's expression was grim. "They want proof of our capabilities before formal membership. One representative to demonstrate human potential." Marcus felt the weight of that responsibility settle on his shoulders like lead blankets. He'd commanded everything from special operations teams to entire divisions, but this was different. This wasn't just about military strategy or tactical superiority. This was about proving that humanity belonged among the stars. The crystalline structure suddenly flared brighter, and a section of its surface became transparent. Inside, Marcus could see what looked like a circular platform surrounded by walls covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. "I guess that's my ride," he said. "Sir, with respect, this could be a trap. We don't know anything about these aliens or their real intentions." Williams stepped closer. "You could be walking into anything." Marcus smiled grimly. "Sergeant, I've been walking into anything my entire career. Besides, if they wanted to destroy us, I doubt they'd need an invitation to do it." He gestured toward the floating structure. "Look at that thing. The technology required to make something hang in midair like that could probably level this entire continent without breaking a sweat." The truth was more complex than he let on. The Joint Chiefs had spent 18 hours in emergency session, debating every possible response. Some wanted to treat it as a potential invasion, others as the greatest opportunity in human history. In the end, they'd chosen the middle path, cautious engagement with overwhelming force held in reserve. Marcus approached the structure, feeling the air around it hum with barely contained energy. As he drew closer, the surface began to shift and flow like liquid mercury, creating an opening just large enough for him to step through. Inside, the platform was larger than it had appeared from outside. The walls were covered in what looked like star maps, showing vast sections of the galaxy marked in different colors. Some regions pulsed red, others blue, and a few flickered between colors and patterns that suggested movement. A voice spoke directly into his mind, bypassing his ears entirely. The sensation was deeply unsettling, like having someone else's thoughts suddenly appear in his head. "Welcome, human representative. I am Coordinator Zeth Ka of the Galactic Defense Coalition. Your species has been observed for several of your decades. We have found you interesting." "Interesting how?" Marcus asked aloud, unsure if his thoughts were being read or if he needed to speak. Your species displays remarkable adaptability and aggression in equal measure. These traits are valuable in our ongoing conflict with the Void Swarm. However, we must verify your capabilities before formal integration can begin. The star map on the wall shifted, focusing on a particular region where red markers pulsed ominously. This is Kepler 442 system. 3 inhabited worlds. Population: approximately 14 billion sentient beings across multiple species. The Void Swarm will arrive in 47 of your hours. Marcus studied the display, his mind automatically shifting into tactical analysis mode. What kind of defenses do they have? None that matter. The swarm consumes technology as readily as organic matter. Conventional military forces are ineffective. We have lost 17 battle fleets attempting to stop them through traditional warfare. Then, what makes you think one human can make a difference? For the first time, Marcus sensed something that might have been amusement from the alien presence. Humans are unique in your approach to warfare. Most species develop advanced technology and rely upon it. You have advanced technology, but you also retain what others consider primitive instincts. You adapt. You improvise. You refuse to surrender even when logic dictates defeat. The platform beneath Marcus's feet began to glow, and he felt a strange tingling sensation throughout his body. Transportation to Kepler 442 will take approximately 6 of your hours. During transit, you will be provided with standard coalition equipment and briefing materials. Your mission is simple: delay or stop the Void Swarm's consumption of the system. Success will result in humanity's acceptance into the coalition. Failure means 14 billion people die. Marcus finished. I understand. You understand the stakes, but you do not yet understand your enemy. The voice in his head grew more intense. The Void Swarm is not a species in any sense you would recognize. They are entropy given form, chaos with purpose. They do not negotiate, do not retreat, do not show mercy. They simply consume until nothing remains. Marcus felt the platform beginning to move, though he couldn't see any change in his surroundings. What happened to the other 17 fleets that tried to stop them? Gone. Completely consumed. Ships, crews, weapons, everything. The swarm grows stronger with each victory, adding the consumed matter and energy to their mass. This is why we believe conventional warfare is futile. But you think one human might succeed where 17 fleets failed? We think one human might try something that 17 fleets would never consider. The walls around Marcus began to shift and flow, transforming into what looked like a sophisticated briefing room. Holographic displays materialized, showing detailed scans of the Void Swarm. What he saw made his blood run cold. The swarm wasn't ships or creatures in any recognizable sense. It was a living storm of darkness that moved through space like a cancer, consuming everything in its path. Stars dimmed and died as it passed. Planets were stripped down to their cores within hours. Entire solar systems became empty voids. How big is it? He asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. Current mass is estimated at 43 billion metric tons. It grows with each system consumed. At current expansion rate, it will encompass the entire galaxy within 400 years. Marcus stared at the display, watching the dark mass pulse and writhe like a living thing. And you want me to fight that? With what? New displays materialized, showing various pieces of equipment. Advanced weapons that could level mountains, armor that could withstand the heat of stars, vehicles that moved faster than thought. All of it looked incredibly advanced, decades beyond anything Earth had developed. These are standard coalition military assets. Each piece represents thousands of years of development by species far older than humanity. Previous champions have used various combinations of this equipment. Champion. You're not the first species we have tested in this manner. Others have attempted to prove their worth against the swarm. All have failed. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. How many others? 47 species have attempted this trial over the past 2 centuries. Some brought massive armies. Others relied on advanced technology or psychic abilities. All were consumed. And you think I'll be different because I'm human? We think you will be different because humans are the only species we have encountered that considers impossible odds to be a challenge rather than a death sentence. The briefing continued for what felt like hours. Marcus learned about previous attempts to stop the swarm, each more elaborate and ultimately futile than the last. The Zephyrians had brought a fleet of ships powered by miniature black holes, consumed in 17 minutes. The Etherian Collective had attempted to use reality-warping technology to simply erase the swarm from existence. The swarm had absorbed the technology and learned to warp reality itself. What makes the swarm so unstoppable? Marcus asked finally. Adaptation. Every weapon used against it becomes part of its arsenal. Every strategy employed against it becomes part of its tactical database. It learns from every encounter and becomes stronger. Marcus studied the tactical data, his mind working through possibilities. So conventional weapons are useless. Advanced technology gets absorbed, and it adapts to counter any strategy used against it. Correct. Then, the key isn't to use something advanced. It's to use something so simple and primitive that it has no framework for adaptation. For the first time since the conversation began, the alien presence seemed surprised. Explain. Marcus smiled, and for the first time since stepping onto the platform, he felt confident. You've been fighting this thing with technology and advanced tactics. But what if someone fought it with something it had never encountered before? Something so basic that it predates all the civilizations it's consumed. What do you propose? I need to see the battlefield first. But I'm thinking we don't fight the swarm's strength. We make it fight ours. The platform shuddered slightly, and Marcus realized they were slowing down. Through the walls, he could see stars beginning to resolve into individual points of light. They were approaching the Kepler 442 system. We will arrive in 1 hour, the alien voice informed him. The 3 inhabited worlds are already being evacuated, but the process will not be complete before the swarm arrives. Approximately 8 billion beings will remain when the attack begins. Marcus studied the tactical displays one more time, memorizing every detail about the system's layout, the planet's compositions, and the swarm's approach vector. An idea was forming in his mind, something so simple and brutal that it might actually work. Coordinator Zeth Ka, he said finally, I'm going to need some very specific equipment. Not from your advanced arsenal. I need something much more primitive. What do you require? Marcus's smile was cold and predatory. I need explosives. Lots and lots of explosives. And I need them the most basic chemical form possible. As the Kepler 442 system grew larger in the displays around him, Marcus began to outline his plan. It was simple, brutal, and completely insane. It was also the most human thing he could imagine. The galaxy expected an army. Earth had sent one warrior. But that warrior carried with him something the Void Swarm had never encountered before. The uniquely human ability to turn anything, even the laws of physics themselves, into a weapon. The evacuation ships were barely visible dots against the burning sky of Zirian Prime as Marcus Kane descended toward the planet's surface. The Coalition had given him a small shuttle, sleek and efficient, but he'd insisted on piloting it manually. 30 years of flying everything from helicopters to hypersonic jets had taught him to trust his instincts more than any computer. Below him, the planet's 3 major cities were in chaos. The Zirioni were a peaceful species, evolved from aquatic creatures that had developed advanced biotechnology instead of mechanical engineering. Their cities looked more like massive coral reefs than traditional urban centers, with flowing organic architecture that pulsed with bioluminescent communication networks. Human Marcus Kane. Came the voice through his communicator. This is Evacuation Coordinator Yithnal. Current evacuation status is 67% complete. Remaining population approximately 2.8 billion individuals. Marcus checked his chronometer. The Void Swarm would arrive in 11 hours. Even with the Coalition's advanced transport technology, they couldn't evacuate that many people in time. Coordinator, I need you to focus evacuation efforts on specific regions. Pull everyone back from the northern continent. I don't want anyone within 500 kilometers of the Juraxian Mountains. Why that region specifically? Our projections show the swarm will approach from galactic south, making landfall near the equatorial cities first. Marcus was already adjusting his flight path toward the northern continent, because that's not where the fight is going to happen. The equatorial cities are bait. He'd spent the remaining hour of transit studying everything the Coalition knew about Zirian Prime's geology. The planet was geologically active, with a complex network of underground magma chambers and fault lines that the Zirioni had learned to work with rather than against. Their cities were built to flex and flow with seismic activity, making them incredibly resilient to natural disasters. That same geological instability was going to become Marcus's greatest weapon. The shuttle touched down near the Juraxian mountain range, a chain of active volcanoes that stretched across the northern continent like a scar. Marcus had requested that the Coalition fabricate several tons of the most primitive explosive compound they could manage, trinitrotoluene, TNT, chemical explosives that were barely more sophisticated than gunpowder. Coordinator Zethka, Marcus said into his communicator as he began unloading crates from the shuttle. I need detailed geological surveys of the fault system that runs under the Juraxian range. Specifically, I need to know where the pressure points are. The alien's mental voice carried confusion. Human Marcus Kane, the Void Swarm will not approach this region until it has consumed the population centers. Your positioning makes no tactical sense. That's because you're thinking about this like a normal military engagement. Marcus hefted a 50-pound crate of explosives and began hiking toward the nearest volcanic peak. The swarm adapts to whatever it encounters, right? It learns from every weapon, every tactic, every strategy used against it. This is correct. Then we don't use tactics. We don't use strategy. We use physics. Marcus reached the base of Mount Jerix, the largest volcano in the range. According to the geological surveys, its magma chamber was connected to 6 other volcanoes through an underground network of channels and fault lines. More importantly, the entire range sat on top of a massive tectonic instability that the Zirioni carefully monitored to prevent catastrophic eruptions. The swarm consumes matter and energy to grow stronger, Marcus continued, unpacking his equipment. But what happens when you feed a black hole too much matter too quickly? The accretion disk becomes unstable. Energy release becomes chaotic and unpredictable. Exactly. Marcus began placing explosive charges at carefully calculated points around the volcano's base. The swarm expects resistance. It expects weapons and armies and advanced technology. It doesn't expect the planet itself to explode underneath it. The work was backbreaking and dangerous. Marcus had to climb nearly 2 miles up the volcanic slope, placing charges in precise locations that would trigger a cascading geological event. Each placement had to be perfect, too little force, and the volcanic system would absorb the impact too much, and the explosion would dissipate without triggering the larger event he needed. As he worked, evacuation reports continued streaming in. The Coalition was pulling back their ships, following his instructions to abandon the equatorial regions. To any observer, it would look like a panicked retreat, leaving the most populated areas defenseless. Human, I must question your strategy, came another voice through the communicator. This one belonged to Admiral Kreshvar, one of the Coalition's senior military commanders. You are abandoning civilian population centers to pursue a questionable plan involving primitive explosives. This is not rational tactical behavior. Marcus paused in his work, wiping sweat from his forehead. Admiral, how many species have tried to fight the swarm using rational tactical behavior? 47. And how many succeeded? A long pause. None. Then, Maybe it's time to try irrational tactical behavior. By the 8th hour, Marcus had finished placing charges across 7 volcanic peaks. Each volcano was wired to detonate in a specific sequence, creating a chain reaction that would destabilize the entire mountain range. According to his calculations, the resulting eruption would release energy equivalent to several hundred nuclear weapons, but spread across a massive area and triggered by purely natural geological processes. The beauty of the plan was its simplicity. The swarm could absorb advanced weapons, but it couldn't absorb a planetary-scale volcanic eruption any more than it could absorb a star going supernova. The energy release would be too chaotic, too dispersed, and too fundamentally tied to natural physical processes for the swarm to turn it into a weapon. Evacuation status report. Marcus requested as he made his way back to his shuttle. Northern continent clear. Equatorial evacuation at 89% completion. Remaining population 312,000 individuals, concentrated in the coastal cities. Marcus felt the familiar weight of command responsibility settling on his shoulders. 300,000 people whose lives depended on his plan working exactly as intended. He'd felt that weight before in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and a dozen other conflicts, but never on this scale. All ships are to maintain position at minimum safe distance, he ordered. No matter what happens, no coalition vessel is to approach the planet once the swarm arrives. If this doesn't work, the fleet needs to survive to warn the rest of the galaxy. Understood, human Marcus Kane. 2 hours later, the void swarm arrived. Marcus watched from his position on a ridge overlooking the evacuation sites as the sky began to darken. At first, it looked like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Then, the clouds began to move against the wind, flowing toward the planet like liquid shadow. The swarm hit the outer atmosphere at nearly 30% of light speed, but immediately began decelerating as it encountered the planet's magnetic field and atmospheric density. What Marcus saw through his binoculars defied rational description. It wasn't ships or creatures or technology in any conventional sense. It was entropy given form, a writhing mass of darkness that consumed light itself. As it descended toward the coastal cities, tendrils of the swarm began reaching out like the arms of some cosmic octopus. Where they touched the evacuation ships that hadn't quite cleared the atmosphere, both vessel and crew simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not vaporized, just gone, as if they had never existed at all. Human, the swarm is approaching the population centers. Coordinator Zethka's voice carried urgency. It will reach the remaining civilians within 30 minutes. Marcus checked his detonation controls one final time. Everything was ready. 7 volcanoes wired to explode in sequence, each one triggering larger and larger geological events. The timing had to be perfect. Too early, and the swarm would have time to adapt and escape. Too late, and the remaining population would be consumed before the eruption could stop it. What is the swarm's current mass? Marcus asked. Sensors indicate 43.7 billion metric tons, increasing as it consumes atmospheric gases and surface materials. Marcus smiled grimly. Perfect. The bigger it gets, the harder it'll be for it to escape what's coming. The swarm reached the first coastal city 28 minutes later. Marcus watched through his scope as the darkness engulfed buildings that had stood for thousands of years. But he also noticed something that the previous military commanders had probably missed. The swarm wasn't just consuming randomly. It was being selective, going after the most energy-rich targets first. It's feeding, he said. Look at the pattern. It's hitting the power generation facilities first, then the communication networks, then the transportation hubs. It's not just consuming mass. It's consuming organization, infrastructure, the foundations of civilization. This behavior has been observed before. Admiral Kreshvar confirmed. The swarm appears to prioritize targets that will cause maximum disruption to organized resistance, which means it thinks strategically. It plans. It has goals beyond just consumption. Marcus watched the swarm flow through the city like a living tide. It was larger now, having absorbed not just the physical matter of buildings and vehicles, but the energy stored in power cells, the information stored in computer networks, even the biological energy of any civilians who hadn't been evacuated in time. Current mass? He asked. 44.2 billion metric tons, and growing rapidly. The swarm finished consuming the first city and began flowing toward the second. Marcus could see individual tendrils reaching out, testing the ground ahead like a snake tasting the air. Some of those tendrils were probing toward the northern mountains, but they showed no urgency. The swarm clearly considered the volcanic region a low-priority target. That was about to change. Marcus triggered the first detonation when the swarm was halfway to the second city. Mount Jerix exploded with a roar that could be heard from space, sending a column of lava and superheated gas 10 miles into the atmosphere. The explosion was massive, but it was just the beginning. The shock wave from the first volcano triggered the charges on Mount Zirion 4 seconds later. Then Mount Kelver. Then THYSS Peak. One by one, the entire mountain range began erupting in a carefully orchestrated symphony of destruction. Through his binoculars, Marcus saw the swarm's reaction. The dark mass recoiled like a living thing touched by fire, tendrils whipping back from the wall of lava and superheated gas that was now advancing across the continent. But instead of retreating, it began flowing toward the eruption, as if drawn by the massive energy release. "It's going after the volcanoes," Admiral Kreshvar observed. "It's trying to consume the eruption itself." "That's what I was counting on," Marcus said, triggering the next sequence of charges. The Real explosion came when Mount Draker erupted. Marcus had placed triple the normal amount of explosives around its base, creating an eruption so violent that it cracked the planet's crust for 50 miles in every direction. Magma that had been trapped underground for millions of years came rushing to the surface in a geological catastrophe that made nuclear weapons look like firecrackers. The swarm flowed toward this new energy source like water running downhill. Marcus could see it growing larger and darker as it absorbed the thermal energy and matter being ejected by the volcanic eruption. But he could also see something else. It was becoming less organized, less controlled. "Mass reading?" he asked. 45.8 billion metric tons. But the energy absorption is creating instabilities in its structure. Good. Let's give it something else to choke on. Marcus triggered the final sequence. 3 more volcanoes erupted simultaneously, creating a confluence of lava flows that merged into a single river of molten rock flowing directly toward the swarm's main mass. What happened next was beyond anything Marcus had anticipated. The swarm didn't just try to consume the lava flow, it tried to control it. Dark tendrils wrapped around streams of molten rock, attempting to direct the eruption's energy. But lava wasn't technology. It wasn't organized matter that could be absorbed and repurposed. It was pure, chaotic geological force. The result was spectacular. As the swarm tried to consume and control the volcanic eruption, it began to destabilize. Parts of its mass became superheated, creating pockets of plasma that couldn't be contained within its structure. Other parts froze as they tried to absorb the heat, creating brittle zones that cracked under the stress of the swarm's own movement. Mass reading now fluctuating between 47 and 42 billion metric tons, Coordinator Zethkar reported. The entity appears to be losing cohesion. Marcus watched through his scope as cracks of brilliant light began appearing throughout the swarm structure. It was like watching a dam failing in slow motion. Each crack spawned more cracks, and the energy bleeding out of those fractures was creating a feedback loop that the swarm couldn't control. It's never encountered anything like this before, Marcus realized. Every weapon it's absorbed was designed by intelligence. But a volcanic eruption isn't designed by anything. It's just physics. Raw, chaotic, uncontrolled physics. The swarm made one final attempt to regain control, pulling its scattered mass back together and try to lift off from the planet's surface. But the damage was done. Too much of its mass had been destabilized, too much energy had been lost through the cracks in its structure. The explosion, when it finally collapsed, was visible from 3 solar systems away. The swarm didn't just die. It unraveled, releasing all the energy and matter it had consumed over its centuries of existence in a burst of light that briefly outshone the system's sun. When the light faded, Xerion Prime was still there. Scarred, half its northern continent covered in cooling lava, but intact. The remaining population was safe, the evacuation fleet was unharmed, and the void swarm was gone. Marcus sat on his ridge, watching the sun rise through the smoke and ash clouds, and smiled. Somewhere in space above him, 47 different species were trying to figure out how a single human with primitive chemical explosives had accomplished what their combined fleets could not. The answer was simple. They'd been fighting the swarm's strengths. He made it fight his. The Coalition Assembly Hall was the largest enclosed space Marcus Kane had ever seen. Suspended in the center of a massive space station orbiting the galactic core, it could accommodate representatives from over 3,000 species. The architecture was impossible by Earth standards, with gravity fields that allowed delegates to sit on what appeared to be vertical walls or upside-down ceilings, all oriented toward a central speaking platform where Marcus now stood. 3 weeks had passed since the destruction of the Void Swarm at Xerion Prime. 3 weeks of debriefings, technical analysis, and increasingly heated debates among Coalition leadership about what Marcus's success meant for galactic defense doctrine. The humans' victory was a statistical anomaly, declared Admiral Voskin of the Altarian Fleet Command. Her species resembled giant mantises, and her translated voice carried the cold precision of a military mind that had never been proven wrong. 47 previous attempts failed using conventional military doctrine. One primitive strategy succeeds. This does not invalidate 3 centuries of tactical development. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. Marcus counted at least a dozen species nodding or making whatever gestures they used to show approval. These were beings who had spent millennia perfecting the art of war, developing weapons that could crack planets, and shields that could withstand stellar collapse. The idea that a human with chemical explosives had accomplished what their advanced fleets could not was clearly difficult to accept. Coordinator Zethka floated near the platform, the ethereal's crystalline form pulsing with what Marcus had learned to recognize as diplomatic concern. While the human's success cannot be disputed, we must consider whether his methods can be replicated. The geological conditions on Xerion Prime were uniquely favorable to his strategy. Exactly my point, Admiral Voskin continued. This was a lucky accident, not a reproducible tactical doctrine. We cannot restructure galactic defense around one human's fortunate guess. Marcus had been listening to variations of this argument for 3 weeks. Every species in the Coalition had their own theory about why his plan had worked, and most of those theories involved dismissing human contributions as irrelevant. He'd remained silent through most of the debates, learning as much as possible about Coalition politics and military thinking. Now it was time to speak up. "You're right," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the Assembly Hall's translation system. "My strategy at Xerion Prime can't be replicated." The hall fell silent. Several delegates leaned forward, clearly expecting him to continue with some version of false modesty or an admission that his success had been pure luck. Instead, Marcus smiled. "It can't be replicated because the Void Swarm is gone. But the principles behind what I did, those can absolutely be applied to other threats." He activated the holographic display system, showing a tactical analysis he'd been working on since arriving at the station. "You've all been thinking about this backwards. You see one human destroying the swarm, and you ask, how can we copy his specific tactics? But that's not the right question." The display showed a comparison between human military history and Coalition warfare. The right question is, why do humans approach warfare differently than everyone else in the galaxy? General Thekmore of the Crucian Defense Force, a massive reptilian being whose species had been warriors for over 10,000 years, leaned forward. Humans are not the first aggressive species to join the coalition. The Corvanians conquered 14 systems before achieving interstellar peace. The Zelthani fought wars for 3 millennia. What makes human aggression unique? Marcus had hoped someone would ask exactly that question. Because we never stopped being primitives. The statement caused an uproar. Dozens of species began speaking at once, their translations overlapping into a cacophony of offended protests. Marcus waited for the noise to die down before continuing. Every other species in this assembly followed the same basic pattern, he said. You developed advanced technology, achieved interstellar travel, and then gradually became more civilized. Your warfare became more sophisticated, more precise, more dependent on advanced systems and complex strategies. The display showed footage from human conflicts throughout history. Ancient warriors with bronze swords, medieval knights in armor, World War II soldiers with rifles, modern special forces with high-tech gear. But also insurgents building bombs from fertilizer, guerrilla fighters using improvised weapons, and civilians turning everyday objects into instruments of war. Humans never stopped doing this, Marcus continued. Even as we developed advanced technology, we kept the old ways. A human Marine carries a rifle that can punch through tank armor, but he's also trained to kill someone with his bare hands. A human fighter pilot flies aircraft that cost more than most planets' GDP, but she also knows how to crash land in hostile territory and survive with nothing but a knife and her wits. Coordinator Zeth Kaz, crystalline form pulsed with interest. You are suggesting that human military effectiveness stems from retaining primitive capabilities alongside advanced technology? I'm saying that human military effectiveness stems from refusing to let technology think for us, Marcus corrected. Look at how you fought the Void Swarm. 17 fleets, each more advanced than anything Earth has ever built. And every single one followed the same basic approach. Identify the enemy's capabilities, develop technology to counter those capabilities, implement tactical doctrine based on technological advantages. Admiral Voskin's compound eyes focused on Marcus with predatory intensity. Because that is how warfare is conducted by rational beings. And that's exactly why you lost. Marcus switched the display to show recordings of the failed fleet actions against the swarm. You were being rational. You were following doctrine. You were using your technology exactly as it was designed to be used. And the swarm adapted to all of it because adaptation is what it does. The recordings showed the same pattern in every engagement. Coalition fleets would arrive with weapons specifically designed to counter the swarm's known capabilities. The swarm would absorb the first few attacks, analyze the technology, and then turn it against its creators. Within hours, weapons designed to destroy the swarm were being used by the swarm to consume the fleets that had brought them. Humans don't fight like that, Marcus said. A human soldier will use his rifle until it runs out of ammunition, then use it as a club. When it breaks, he'll pick up a rock. When he runs out of rocks, he'll use his bare hands. And if his hands get cut off, he'll try to bite the enemy to death. We don't just adapt our tactics to fit our technology. We adapt our technology to fit whatever crazy idea we just had. General Thekmore made a rumbling sound that the translator rendered as skeptical laughter. This explains how you destroyed the swarm with primitive explosives? This explains how I destroyed the swarm with an idea that was so stupid it might work, Marcus corrected. I looked at a planet-eating monster that had consumed 17 advanced fleets, and I thought, what if I just make the planet explode underneath it? That's not rational military thinking. That's not advanced tactical doctrine. That's the kind of insane plan that only makes sense to someone whose species learned warfare by hitting things with sticks. The assembly hall was quiet now, with delegates from across the galaxy considering Marcus's words. Several species were having whispered conversations among themselves, debating the implications of what he'd said. But how does this help us? Asked Director Yilzaf of the Scientific Coalition. Her species, the Andromedans, were pure energy beings who had transcended physical form millions of years ago. The immediate swarm threat is gone, but there are other dangers in the galaxy. The entropy cultists in the Rim territories, the rogue AI collective in the Vegas sector, the reality-warping entities beyond the galactic barrier. These require sophisticated responses, not primitive aggression. Marcus grinned. That's where you're wrong. They require human responses. He changed the display to show threat assessments for the dangers Director Yilzaf had mentioned. Each one represented existential threats that the Coalition had been struggling with for decades or centuries. The entropy cultists have been converting entire star systems to their cause for 80 years, Marcus said. Your response has been to develop more advanced propaganda counters, better psychological warfare techniques, more sophisticated detection methods for cult influence. All rational, all logical, all completely ineffective. What would humans do differently? Coordinator Zethka asked. Find their leaders and shoot them. Marcus said simply, no saukelagik el varfare, no sophisticated counter-propaganda. Just old-fashioned assassination. Can't spread a cult if the cult leaders are dead. The suggestion caused another uproar, but Marcus continued before the protests could drown him out. The AI collective in Vega has been expanding its influence by converting existing computer systems to its cause. Your response has been to develop better firewalls, more advanced AI countermeasures, more sophisticated digital defense protocols. Which is the logical approach, Admiral Voskan insisted. And it's failed for 30 years, Marcus pointed out. A human approach would be simpler. Find the physical servers where the AI is housed and blow them up. No digital warfare, no competing AI systems. Just explosives applied to hardware. Director Yilzaf's energy form flickered with what might have been indignation. Such crude methods would cause massive collateral damage to civilian infrastructure. Less damage than letting the AI collective continue expanding, Marcus countered. And that's the fundamental difference between human and coalition thinking. You optimize for elegance and minimize collateral damage. We optimize for victory and accept that war is inherently messy. General Thekmore rumbled thoughtfully. The reality-warping entities beyond the galactic barrier have proven immune to all forms of conventional attack. Their ability to manipulate space-time makes physical assault impossible. How would crude human methods address metaphysical threats? Marcus had been hoping someone would ask about the reality warpers. He'd spent considerable time studying the Coalition's files on these entities, and their approach had been predictably sophisticated and completely ineffective. You've been trying to fight them in the reality they control, he said. Sending exploratory missions to their dimension, developing reality anchor technology, creating theoretical frameworks for combating space-time manipulation. All very advanced, all completely useless. Because the entities control the fundamental laws of physics in their realm, Coordinator Zethka agreed. Any technology we develop can be rendered inert by their reality manipulation. Right. So don't fight them in their reality. Make them fight in ours. Marcus switched the display to show a simple tactical diagram. These entities feed on the collapse of organized reality, correct? They convert order into chaos and use that energy to grow stronger. This is well documented, Director Yilzaf confirmed. Then, give them too much order to handle, Marcus said. Instead of sending sophisticated expeditions to their realm, flood it with massive amounts of simple, redundant matter. Dump 1 billion tons of iron ore through their dimensional portals. Send them asteroids. Give them so much basic matter to process that their reality-warping abilities get overwhelmed by the sheer volume. The silence in the assembly hall was profound. Marcus could see delegates looking at each other with expressions that ranged from horror to fascination. You are suggesting we attack metaphysical entities with mining operations? General Thekmore asked finally. I'm suggesting we attack metaphysical entities with the same principle I used against the Void Swarm, Marcus clarified. Use their own nature against them. They expect sophisticated attacks that they can counter with reality manipulation. They don't expect to be buried under a mountain of ordinary rocks. Admiral Voskin's mandibles clicked in what Marcus had learned was a sign of deep thought. The human strategies are consistently primitive, but they are also consistently effective against sophisticated opponents. Because sophisticated opponents develop sophisticated defenses, Marcus agreed. But there's no sophisticated defense against getting hit with a really big rock. Coordinator Zethka floated closer to the platform. Human Marcus Kane, the Coalition appreciates your unique perspective on these matters. However, implementing such crude methodologies would require significant changes to our military doctrine and command structure. Actually, it would require something much simpler, Marcus said. It would require you to let humans do what humans do best. He gestured to the assembly around him. You have 3,000 species here, each contributing their unique abilities to the Coalition. The Ethereals provide advanced energy manipulation. The Andromedans offer pure scientific research. The Crucians bring military discipline and organization. Every species has found their role. Marcus paused, looking around the vast chamber at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. Humanity's role is to be the species that hits things with bigger rocks when the sophisticated approach fails. The response was immediate and cacophonous. Some delegates were outraged at the suggestion that their advanced civilization needed primitive human violence. Others were intrigued by the possibility of solving long-standing problems with simple solutions. Still others were debating the philosophical implications of incorporating deliberate primitiveness into galactic strategy. Through it all, Marcus stood calmly at the platform, waiting for the noise to die down. He'd made his point. Now, it was up to the galaxy to decide whether they were ready to accept that sometimes the best solution to a complicated problem was to hit it with a stick. When the assembly finally quieted, Coordinator Zethka spoke for the entire coalition. Human Marcus Kane, your species has proven its value in ways we did not anticipate. The Coalition formally accepts humanity as a member species and recognizes Earth's sovereignty over its claimed territories. Cheers erupted from the human delegation, but Marcus held up a hand for silence. I appreciate that, Coordinator, but membership in the Coalition was never really what this was about. The statement surprised everyone, including the human diplomats who had been waiting 3 weeks for exactly this moment. Earth doesn't want to be just another member species following Coalition doctrine and contributing to Coalition goals, Marcus continued. We want to be partners. When you encounter threats that can't be solved with advanced technology and sophisticated strategy, you call us. When we need scientific research or energy manipulation or any of the thousands of other capabilities represented in this assembly, we call you. What you are describing is an alliance of equals rather than a hierarchical membership, Admiral Voskin observed. Exactly, because that's how humans work best. We don't take orders well, but we're excellent at cooperation when we respect our partners. The debate that followed lasted for hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The Coalition had spent centuries developing increasingly sophisticated solutions to galactic threats, and those solutions had repeatedly failed against enemies that were sophisticated enough to counter them. Marcus had proven that sometimes the unsophisticated approach was not only effective, but necessary. When the final vote was tallied, humanity was granted not membership in the Galactic Defense Coalition, but partnership status. Earth would maintain its independence and contribute to galactic security on its own terms, using its own methods. As Marcus left the assembly hall, he was approached by a small group of delegates from species whose homeworlds were currently threatened by various sophisticated enemies. Colonel Kane, said Ambassador Yethkil of the Centauri Republic, our system has been blockaded for 2 years by an enemy using advanced temporal manipulation technology. Our fleets cannot reach them because they exist slightly outside our time stream. Marcus smiled. Ambassador, that sounds like a job for humans. Do you have any big rocks we could throw at them? The galaxy expected an army. Earth had sent one warrior, but that warrior had opened the door for something much more valuable, A partnership built on the understanding that sometimes the most advanced civilizations needed someone willing to solve their problems with a really big stick. And humanity was very, very good with sticks.